A drifter won a widow's ranch in a card game, then gave it back the next morning. The deed was still warm from my coat pocket when I knocked on her door. It was early, first light barely making the snow blue. My horse was saddled and I had my bedroll tied, same as I'd ridden into that town 3 days before. Meant to ride through, didn't, never do. The door opened about 4 inches and she looked at me through the gap the way a woman looks at a rattlesnake that hasn't moved yet. Not fear exactly, calculation. "You won it fair," she said, first thing out of her mouth. No good morning, no nothing. I know I did. I held the deed out through the gap. She didn't take it, just looked at it, then at me. "Then what's the angle?" That was the question, wasn't it? Been asking it myself since about 2 in the morning, sitting on a cot in the Delmonico Hotel with that piece of paper on the wool blanket beside me and the lamp turned low, trying to find my own angle. Couldn't locate one. That bothered me some. "No angle," I said. "It's your ranch, take it back." She studied me a long few seconds. I heard a child somewhere inside, movement, not crying. She kept her eyes on me and pulled the door back another foot. "Come in then, coffee's on." That was Nella Hurst. That was the morning I stopped being a man passing through. I should back up, tell you about the card game. Town was called Persimmon Wells, which is a name that sounds like it was invented by someone who'd never been there, because nothing grew within 20 miles of it except scrub and hardship. I'd come down from the Dakotas, working a cattle drive that folded when the outfit's financing went sideways, which is a fancy way of saying the owner lost his money at cards before I did. I had about $40, a good horse, and nowhere particular to be. The saloon was called the Buffalo, though the only buffalo I saw was a moth-eaten head mounted over the bar, one glass eye missing, and the remaining one looking mournful about the whole situation. There were 3 tables going when I walked in, and I settled at the faro table first, which I shouldn't have. Lost $12 before I understood the dealer was working the box, and moved myself to the poker table in the corner. 4 men. Rancher named Cord, who was big through the chest and soft through the eyes the way men get when they've had everything easy. 2 ranchers' hands who were there for entertainment, not serious money. And a man named Wills, who I later understood had been working at Nella's ranch on some kind of contract agreement that had soured, and who had, in lieu of wages owed, accepted a partial stake in the ranch's deed as settlement. The southeast pasture and water rights, roughly 1/3 of the operating value, plus the lien on the equipment. This was, from all I could gather, Nella's idea of keeping him quiet until she figured out how to buy him out. Wills had his own idea, which was to leverage that partial deed into the rest of the spread at the card table. Men do that. They mistake other people's property for their own chips. I didn't know any of this when I sat down. I just saw a poker game. I play a patient game. I'm not a man who wins big early and then gives it back. I lose small, I learn the table, and then I pick my spots. Cord was reckless. The 2 hands were there to drink. Wills was good, better than Cord, better than the hands, but he had something working against him that no amount of card skill fixes, which is that he cared too much about a particular pot. A man who needs to win a certain hand is a man you can read. It went 3 hours. I was up 20, down 30, up 60, then the serious money came out. Wills laid the deed on the table around midnight, backing a hand I knew he didn't have because I had 2 of the cards he needed. Cord folded. The hands folded. I called. 3 queens against his 2 pair. He left the table without a word, which told me he was dangerous, and I pocketed the deed and had 1 more drink and went to bed. Lay there thinking about a woman I'd never met who'd wake up in the morning still thinking she had a plan for buying out Wills, not knowing the deed had changed hands again. The plan was gone. I'd taken it without meaning to. That kept me awake longer than I expected. Nella Hurst was 34, I know that now. That morning at the door she looked ageless the way working women get, not old, just permanent, like she'd always been exactly this and would still be this at 60. Brown hair pinned back without much ceremony, hands that had done things, a directness in her face that some men would have called hardness and that I recognized as something else, the look of someone who'd stopped waiting for circumstances to improve and started managing them instead. She poured 2 cups and set mine on the table and didn't sit down right away, checked something on the stove, looked through the window toward the barn. "My boy's out feeding," she said. I said that was fine. She sat down across from me. She had the deed in her hand now, the one I'd slid across the threshold, and she was looking at it but not reading it, like she was deciding something. "You don't know anything about this place," she said. "No. You don't know about the water situation, the eastern fence that needs 3 weeks of work, the fact that I owe the bank in Harding $412 and they've been patient about it, but patient has a limit." I drank the coffee. It was strong and good. "I'm not trying to take your ranch," I said. "I just want a card game. Men who win things generally want to keep them. I'm not most men." She looked at me then, not the calculation from the door, something more direct than that. Like she was trying to see something past the surface of me, the way you look at a horse you're thinking about buying, and you're trying to see through the showmanship to what's actually there. "Why'd you come back?" she asked, the honest answer. I thought about it, because it wasn't mine to keep. Will's thought it was his. Will's was wrong. She set the deed flat on the table between us, smoothed it once with her palm and didn't say anything for a while. The stove popped. Outside I could hear the boy moving around the barn, a bucket handle swinging, the low complaint of cattle. "The eastern fence," she said finally. "You any good with wire?" I should explain what I was, so you understand what that question meant to me. I was 41 years old and I had spent approximately 20 of those years moving. Not running. I want to be clear about the difference because there is one. Running is when there's something behind you. Moving is when there's nothing in front. I'd worked cattle from Texas to Montana. I'd done some freighting, some scouting, one winter of deputy work in a town in Colorado that I don't recommend to anyone. I knew how to fix most things and build some things, and I traveled with tools. I didn't own land. I didn't own much of anything. What I'd learned in all that moving was that the world has 2 kinds of men as far as most people are concerned. Men who matter to a place, and men who pass through it. I'd been passing through so long I'd stopped noticing. You don't notice a habit until something interrupts it. Her question interrupted it. "You any good with wire?" Like I was someone who might stay. Like she was already thinking 2 weeks ahead to when the fence would be done and what came after. Nobody had thought 2 weeks ahead where I was concerned in a long time. "Fair," I said. "Fair's enough. 3 strands cedar posts every 12 feet. I can't pay you much." "I'm not asking for much." She looked at the deed again. "You're asking for something." She wasn't wrong. I didn't have a name for it right then, but she wasn't wrong. "Coffee," I said, "and a straight answer when I earn one." The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, but something. Her boy's name was Cal. He was 11, wiry, serious in the way that boys get when they've had to be. He came in from the barn with hay on his jacket and looked at me at the table with his mother's same measuring expression, and I thought, she's raised him in her own image, which is a fine thing to do if you're a person worth imitating. "This is Mr." She stopped, looked at me. "Dent," I said, "Harlan Dent. Mr. Dent is going to work on the east fence." Cal looked at me the way an 11-year-old boy looks at a strange man in his kitchen, which is a look somewhere between suspicion and a kind of desperate hope that he manages not to show fully. Then he sat down and ate breakfast and asked me did I know the fence had 3 bad sections, not just the one his mother thought. And I said I didn't, but I did now, and he allowed as how he could show me after school if I wanted. I said I'd appreciate that. Nella watched this exchange from the stove with her back to us, but I could tell she was listening. I camped the first week. Not because she didn't have room, there was a bunkhouse that had seen better days but was weatherproof, but because I wanted her to have the choice. Every morning I came up to the house for coffee and got my work for the day, and every evening I went back to the camp I'd made in a dry wash about a quarter-mile out. Clean line. Nobody had to wonder what I was doing there. The fence was worse than she'd described. 3 bad sections was Cal's count. My count was 5, plus a corner post that had heaved in a freeze 2 winters back and was leaning about 15 degrees and holding by stubbornness alone. I dug that one out in the first 2 days and set a new post, and Cal held the brace bar while I tamped the dirt back in, and he did it right, didn't let it drift, kept checking the level, didn't need to be told twice. "You learned to do that yourself?" I asked him. "Mom showed me. She set posts. She does most things," he said, like it was simply true and not particularly remarkable, which to him it wasn't. I thought about that a lot while I worked. A woman running a ranch on her own, teaching her son to set posts. The husband dead, I gathered from things not said more than things said. The trouble with wills that had resulted in the deed situation, which I pieced together over the first week from things Nella said carefully and things Cal said without any care at all. Wills had been her foreman, had done the job well enough for a year. Then had started to believe that doing the job entitled him to more than wages, which is a line that once a man crosses it you can't uncross it, and Nella had tried to manage him out slowly instead of cleanly, which was the one error in judgment I could identify in her, though I suspected she knew it and it troubled her. I didn't say any of this, wasn't my business, I fixed the fence. By Friday of the first week, she met me at the corner post with a cup of coffee and watched me work for a while without talking, and then said, "Bunkhouse has a good stove, warmer than a wash. Figured I'd let you decide that." I just did. I moved my gear that afternoon. I should tell you about the bank situation, because it matters. $412. The man at the bank in Harding was named Pressler, and he had been, by Nella's account, reasonable, not generous, but reasonable, which is about as much as you can ask of a banker. The note had been extended twice. It was going to have to be settled or extended again by the end of March, and March was 6 weeks out. The previous summer's cattle sales had covered operating costs and the first will's payment and not much else. She had about 60 head of good stock, a small hay operation, and the water rights on the creek that ran through the southeast pasture, the same pasture that had been in the deed wills had on the table that night. Without those water rights, the ranch was about a third less valuable and a lot harder to run. I'd won those water rights at the same time I'd won the rest of it. She had them back now. I knew the 60 head of stock could be driven to Harding and sold for somewhere between $450 and $550, depending on the market, which would clear the note and leave her with operating money. But that would leave the ranch with no breeding stock and no income base for the following year, which was trading one problem for a worse one. I turned it over most of an evening and came to the house the next morning with a different number. "How many of those 60 head can you cull without gutting your breeding program?" I asked. She was rolling out dough, didn't look up. "I've done that math. 22, maybe 24 head. Best price I could get would be $250. That doesn't cover the note." "What if you got 400? She stopped rolling, looked at me. "There's a buyer in Cheyenne," I said. "Man named Acker. I drove a herd to him 2 years ago, smaller than yours. He pays above market for quality stock because he's supplying to a hotel operation and he needs consistent grade. He's not convenient, but the numbers work." "How far to Cheyenne?" 10 days, good weather, 12 if it turns." "I can't leave the ranch for 12 days. "I know, I wasn't suggesting you go." She looked at me for a while. The rolling pin was still in her hands. "You drive 20 head to Cheyenne for me." I drove a herd up the Bozeman Trail in weather that would have stopped most men. 20 head to Cheyenne is a pleasure trip. I'd need to know you'd come back. There it was, the real question, the one underneath the practical one. I didn't answer it right away because it deserved more than a quick answer. I thought about the wash I'd camped in the first week, the fact that she'd told me to move to the bunkhouse, the corner post, and Cal holding the brace bar without being told twice, the way this place had started to feel like something rather than nothing to me. I know I'm a man who moves, I said. I've been that man a long time, but I also know when a place has something worth coming back to, and right now this place does. I hadn't looked away from her when I said it. She hadn't looked away from me. She set the rolling pin down. All right, she said. I'll cut the 20 head. I left on a Tuesday in late February with 22 head. She'd found 2 more that made the cut, and a letter of introduction she'd written to Acker in her clear, spare handwriting, and a biscuit wrapped in cloth that Cal had pressed into my hand without any ceremony like it was a practical matter, which I suppose it was. The weather held, cold but clear. I pushed them steady, not hard, the way you move cattle you want to arrive in condition, and I thought about things I don't usually think about on the trail. What a fixed place feels like. What it is to know the particular sound of a particular door. Whether a man can be known by a woman who hasn't had much reason to trust the kind of man he is. I sold the 22 head for $438. Acker looked them over twice and raised his first offer himself, which is something buyers almost never do, which told me her stock was better than she probably knew. I was back in 9 days. The weather turned on the way home, and I made time in the last stretch. She was in the yard when I rode in, doing something with the water trough that involved a mallet and a block of wood. She looked up when she heard me come through the gate, looked at my face, then at the absence of cattle, then back at my face. "How we do," she said. I pulled out the envelope with the money and handed it down from the saddle. She opened it, counted it with her thumb. Her expression didn't change, but something in her shoulders did. "This clears the note," she said. "And then some." She closed the envelope, looked up at me. The light was going, long and flat and gold across the snow. "You came back," she said. "Told you I would. Lot of men tell me things." "I know." She held my gaze a few seconds more, and I could see her settling something, some last held question, some final piece of assessment. And then she nodded once, the way she nodded when a practical matter had been resolved satisfactorily. "Get your horse put up," she said. "Supper's on." That was March. By April I was less a hired hand than something without a clean name, not a partner in the legal sense, not yet, but something that the ranch operated around, that Cal came to naturally with questions about things that needed deciding, that Nella consulted in the evenings over the kitchen table with the lamp between us and the account book open. I'd stopped thinking about moving. I'd stopped checking the road. Wills came back in April. I should tell you this because it's part of the story, and because it had an ending I didn't plan. He came up the road on a Thursday afternoon with 2 men I didn't know and a manner that said he'd been thinking about this ride for a while. I was at the woodpile. Nella was in the house. Cal was at school. Wills pulled up and looked down at me from his horse with the particular look men get when they've convinced themselves that the wrong done to them is the whole story. "Where's Nella?" "Inside. I want to talk to her about the deed." "The deed's been settled," I said. "You know that." "I know some drifter won it at cards and handed it back. I want to hear from Nella what her intentions are going forward. The matter of the wages owed me wasn't settled by that card game." I set down the axe. "The wages conversation is between you and her, but you don't ride onto this property with 2 men and a tone. You come back alone and you knock on the door." He looked at me for a long time. His 2 men were watching. "You got no standing here," he said. "I've got all the standing I need," I said. "It's not a thing I can fully explain. I'm not a man given to large statements, But standing there at that woodpile on a Thursday in April, this was my place. Not in the deed sense. In the sense that I knew where the bad corner post was, and where the water ran fastest in the thaw, and which of the 60 head favored the northwest pasture, and the particular sound of that back door in the morning. I had earned that knowledge. A man earns his place not by holding a paper, but by knowing the land and being trusted by the people on it. And I had been both. Wills read something in my face. He looked at me another few seconds, then looked at the house. Nella had come to the window, I knew without looking, and something in his calculation shifted. He turned his horse. The two men followed. I watched them go down the road and out the gate, and I stood there a minute in the cold, something settling in my chest that I didn't have a word for right then. The back door opened behind me. I heard her come across the yard. She stopped beside me. We both watched the road empty now. Then she put her hand through my arm, just took hold of my arm above the elbow, both her hands, the way you hold onto something when you want it to stay where it is. "Thank you," she said. Wasn't much. It was exactly what it needed to be. She turned to look at me, that direct, clear look she had, nothing hidden in it. "You know you don't have to keep proving yourself to me." I looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean I've known what you are for a while, since about a week after you drove to Cheyenne, if you want the exact date." She wasn't soft about it. She was just stating it, the way she stated most things, as a practical matter. "I'm saying you can stop. You're here. That's enough." The afternoon was quiet. Wind off the northern flat, a smell of pine and cold water. I put my hand over hers where they held my arm. "All right," I said. There's not much to tell after that, and I say that as a good thing. The bank note got settled. The east fence held through the next winter, and I rebuilt 2 more sections the following spring. Cal started going with me when I worked the cattle, and then started going without me when I wasn't needed, which is the best indication I can think of that you've taught someone something real. He called me Harlan for about 6 months, and then one morning he called me something else, just once, and didn't look at me when he said it, and I didn't say anything about it either, because some things don't need to be made official to be true. Nella and I were married in the fall, small affair. The county judge and 2 witnesses from neighboring ranches, and Cal standing straight-backed in a shirt he'd ironed himself without being asked. I still have the deed from that card game. The original one I handed back through her door that cold morning. She found it in my coat pocket a year into our marriage, framed it, and hung it in the front room. I said it seemed like an odd thing to hang on a wall. She said, "It's the first thing you ever gave me." I've thought about that. She's not wrong. I gave it back because it wasn't mine, and in giving it back I found the thing that was. I was a man who moved for 20 years, and then I stopped. That's the whole of it, really. The rest, the fence work, the cattle, the bank note, the morning with Wills, that's just the how of it. The fact of it is simpler. A woman looked at me like I was worth looking at. Not like I was a problem to be managed. Not like I was a drifter she'd made a practical arrangement with. Not like I was useful. Like I was the man she'd chosen. Deliberately. With her eyes open, knowing what I was. I'd moved through a lot of towns and a lot of arrangements and a lot of mornings without anything to show for them. And then I moved through this one, and I stopped. She's asleep right now. I'm up early, habit of a long life. Lights coming gray over the eastern ridge, same light it was when I first knocked on that door. The ranch is quiet. The cattle are shapes in the pasture. I can hear the creek. I've got coffee on, and her chair is pulled out at the table, which is as close as I ever come to ceremony. Some mornings I still look at the deed on the wall and think about that cot in the Delmonico Hotel, and the decision I made somewhere around 2 in the morning, that I didn't entirely understand at the time. I understand it now. A man learns eventually what he's worth, takes the right person to show him.